Okay, and we're here. Well, I'm here. If you're here, that's good too. I have no choice because I'm here already. I have revealed myself. I have stepped out of the shrubbery. I cannot disappear. Well, not very conveniently, and certainly not without it being obvious that that's what I'm doing. So, I'm here and hope to see you. And thank you for joining me, those of you who've already checked in. It is just a minute or so after 7 o'clock California time, which is, of course, what the time is where I am because the Beale Williams Honor Rancho is located in California, not that far from the ocean. So although you can't hear it from here, you can't see it from here, but you definitely you can smell it at night when the offshore breeze starts to come in, and it's a couple of minutes away by car. So we are quite happy in the woods, but it's also nice to be near the ocean as well. Anyway, hoping you are having a good weekend so far. We're all doing pretty well here. Under the circumstances, we're moving forward and getting on with things, and I am doing the same myself with the writing and whatnot. I was just saying last night, I think I'm up to about page 940 of my manuscript. Though I'm not exactly sure how much farther I have to go, but I'm definitely in the closing stretches now. It's another long book, even though it's only half a book. It's already, I think, a little bit longer than To Green Angel Tower was, although that was the length of the manuscript once I'd finished. With To Green Angel Tower was about 1,600 pages, and in those days they were printed out. I never print out manuscripts anymore. So whether that's exactly correct or not, but it certainly seems to be at least as long as, if you take these last two volumes that were originally going to be one, it certainly seems to be about at least as long as To Green Angel Tower altogether. So you can see why it would have been a problem to publish them. Remember, we couldn't do it with To Green Angel Tower, even those days when we could get inexpensive, very thin paper for the hardcover and manage to do the hardcover. But the paperback simply would not work. I remember very well when my publisher, Betsy Walheim, called me in when I was visiting New York and said, okay, here's what To Green Angel Tower would look like as a paperback. And they'd mocked this up. And she basically just kind of opened it and the whole middle fell out because it was just too darn many pages. And that would have been true with this one too. So, but one of these days, I swear, one of these days, I am going to write a proper 3-book trilogy. Anyway, so what else is there to chat about? Not much, really. We're still in kind of family shock and moving forward on various things that have to be dealt with, and just in terms of the changes in life that are happening now for our larger family. The domestic affairs are much the same, except that we are, because of everything that's happened, we haven't had a chance yet to go up and visit our two young people up in Northern California, which is something we're very sad about because we certainly thought we would have been up once or twice by now. They've been out there. They've been up there for like a month, but everything else happened. They got COVID and my mom and just everything. But other than that, we're all doing okay. The dogs are okay. Johnny has not escaped in several weeks, which I cannot tell you how much easier in my mind that makes me, because it's just a constant source of worry. He's a very sweet dog, but he is also very territorial. So, he runs around and barks at everybody, and he considers, trucks and pretty much anything that comes near or onto his property to be the tools of the devil, the dog devil, I guess, meant to personally upset and worry him. And so when he gets out, he has a tendency to run up and down our street and across all over our woody hillside neighborhoods, and barks at other people's dogs and just generally raises a horrible ruckus. So the fact that he has not escaped, and that all the changes that we've had to make, which had been another thing that was going on in the last month or so, various things we had to do with the house, including refencing parts of it. So anyway, that's where I'm at. Life as per usual generally has kind of returned. I will be continuing to read, barring unexpected happenstance. So we're certainly going to be doing this for a bit. We're not even quite halfway through the Dragonbone chair, as you can see from where I don't know what this thing is, but this is the current bookmark, and you can see we're just a little less than halfway through. So, anything else? Nah, not really. I'm just going to go ahead and say hello to the folks who have checked in. And let's see who we've got. Medardo Orlando Mazadueñas. El Señor. Hello. Good to see you, Medardo, as always. How nice. Medardo says he sees Ostenard in the books through the eyes of Binabik. Binabik was a really interesting character, I have to say, in that I didn't initially plan him. The whole kind of structure of the books to begin with, as I think I've said, was more about what happens when a famous, powerful king dies, based on both fiction and history. The way that Charlemagne's empire kind of collapsed after it was split up among his sons, and the non-historical, fictional examples of King Arthur and things like that. You very seldom see any kind of orderly transfer of power after the death of a great and important king. And so that was where my focus was to begin with. But then as I went along, and it became more and more clear to me that I didn't want to stay at that level of only dealing with the powerful people, and that I really wanted to tell the story through the eyes of somebody who was at least putatively an ordinary person, hence Simon. Then I wanted to begin to open Simon up to the larger world as he ran away from his home, which we've already seen in the first part of the Dragonbone chair, where he escaped from his home. And so I was looking for a character to be his amanuensis, however that's pronounced, but sort of his mentor, or somebody who would at least help him in the beginning. And so Binabik, who was originally named Billabil, if I recall, came to be. But then I just kind of fell in love with him as a character, both his way of speaking and his folk wisdom and his essential kindness, which has always been something that I care about a lot. That my favorite people are kind people, even if they're not, the smart, the richest, the most powerful, the cleverest people, whatever. I really admire kindness and always have. And that was one of the things that made Binabik who he was, in my mind, obviously, because I was inventing a character. But as a result, he kind of grew on me. Here, let me change that so I'm a little more in the middle. As a result, he kind of grew on me, and his role just kept expanding, and his backstory and all of that stuff, as oftentimes happens with these big, long books, which is one of the reasons I continue to write them, because things happen that you don't plan, but after the fact, you go, oh, of course, that had to happen. It wouldn't have been Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn without Binabik. Just wouldn't, So anyway, just a little bit of a backstory there. He was another character who grew in the telling, as the old expression goes. Kelly, hello, good evening from Alberta, battered and bruised, but you're here. Well, I'm very glad you're here. I'm sorry you're battered and bruised, but good to hear from you anyway. Ray, greetings, good to see you. Jennifer, hello, hope you are well too. Jared, hi, how you doing? We are having a pretty good evening here, all things considered, and no complaints. And what I have in store for you tonight is more of the same, just me reading stuff. Susan, hello, good evening. Nice to have you with us. Carl, good evening. Hello, how are you? Lori, hello, good to see you. Thanks for reading, and you look forward to this every week. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. I look forward to sharing with you guys. Barb Ann, checking in from cold and rainy Massachusetts. Oh, you have my sympathies. We are I won't tell you what kind of weather we're having. That's just the kind of thing I do when I want to be mean to my English relatives, and they're going, "Oh God, it's like this here." And if I'm feeling particularly devilish and cruel, I'll go, "Oh yeah, huh? That's too bad. Yeah, 76, sunny, a little breeze, kind of nice here." But anyway, so you have my sympathies, and I'm sure I'll have crappy weather at some point later in the year when you have good weather, and you can laugh at me. I won't take it personally. Who else have I not said hello to yet? That was Barban. So Matthew, hello. Good to see you. Good afternoon and good evening to you. Penny, hello. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're enjoying that. I enjoy reading them. You know, it's funny because this is the first time I've ever heard most of these things read out loud by anybody, because I don't tend to listen to... I will listen to the people who are auditioning to be the readers of the audiobooks, for instance. But I don't sit down and ever listen to the audiobook. You know, I'll hear them reading a line or two, you know, which is what we get. They'll send me 4 or 5 candidates reading a few lines, you know, or a paragraph or whatever. And Deb and I will give feedback on, you know, oh, liked so-and-so particularly, thought that was really interesting, or not too sure about that one. But anyway, so I never actually listened to the audiobooks because, for God's sakes, you know, I mean, these are thousands of pages of material. I don't want... You know, it was hard enough having to go back and read them when I started the new series, but let alone, you know, sit there listening to my own books. But so as a result, I don't, you know, some of these things I've never pronounced before because I only wrote them down. I didn't actually pronounce them. And as I think I've also already told you guys, I just because of my schedule and life and, you know, the universe and everything, I don't get a chance to sit down before I do these readings in the evening and go and say, oh, okay, who's coming up in the upcoming chapter and what kind of a voice should I do for them? And, you know, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that's really bad. You know, the part of me that comes from theater and, you know, where we would tirelessly work on creating a character and practicing and trying a different voice. And, you know, then when we settle on a voice, really working to make sure you had it right and thinking about posture and, you know, all the stuff you do when you're in theater. I don't have time to do that anymore. And I certainly don't have time to do that in a book with 250 characters. And I don't even have time to look at what I'm going to read ahead of time. So, you know, every now and then, you know, you'll see me, I'll just read a sentence and I'll get halfway through it and realize, no, that's not what the sentence says. You know, I've put the emphasis in the wrong place and have to go back and start over. Fortunately, not too often, but often enough that you can see it happening. And as a result, I have no idea what these characters are going to sound like. And oftentimes, and this is the truth, oftentimes I'm literally saying, as I'm reading, I see a name in the next line and go, oh, crap. How would this person talk? You know, and that's the reason I fall back on a lot of really, you know, simplistic accents or very minor dialect things or whatever, is just because, you know, I mean, I just had to do it on the spot. So I apologize if I had more time, if I was doing this as, what's the word I'm looking for? An actual audio book, I would be able to, you know, say, okay, this is work. I will put so much time into it, you know. Excuse me, but I just can't really do it. So you're getting improv. You're getting improv, Tad. So I hope it's okay. I thank you for your patience with me. Anyway, let's see. Who did I said hello to Penny. There's Tracy. Hi, Tracy. Good to see you. Thank you. Claudia. Good evening. Evening to you. Joanna. Hello. Nice to have you. Tim. Hello. Yes, I have had an agreeable week under the circumstances, as I keep saying, because I don't want to make light of what my family went through or what I'm still going through. But under the circumstances, which were miserable, we're doing okay. And I've appreciated all the help and moral support we've had from you guys. Isaac, hey, thank you for dropping in, even if you're on your way to go do something else. Going to start a D&D, so I'm assuming that you are going to be the dungeon master. Or maybe you just mean start, like, begin your participation in. So whatever you're doing, have fun. That's one of the things I miss now that our two most avid D&D people have moved out of the household and moved north. We used to have large groups of teens and early 20-year-olds all sitting around the table playing D&D and screaming and yelling. And occasionally when we wanted to like concentrate on something, it was a little difficult, but it was really good fun. And they were all really nice kids. So I missed that. So have fun. D&D well. Margaret, hello, hello. Waiting in Central Florida. Oh yeah, good luck. Hope the storm is not too bad for you. Matthew? Excuse me, Matthew asks if Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn was made into a series or show. Any thoughts on any specific actor or actress for any roles? No, although that's a discussion it would be interesting to have. And certainly I'd be entertained to hear other people's thoughts. I'm a little superstitious about that. By way of explanation, when I was first in having these questions from people, well, if they made the Dragonbone chair into a book, who would play Simon? And in those days, this is so far back now that in those days, the two actors that I first thought of were Eric Stoltz and Matthew Modine, who are both now about 50. So it's been a long time. So we'll see when it happens, what happens. But I'm always entertained by other people speculating. But I don't even know who most of the young actors who would be the age to play Simon or Miriam-L, for instance. I think, I mean, you can sort of pick your thing with anybody else. You can go Joshua, Tom Hiddleston. I don't know. So, I mean, but as I said, I've been burned by this several times. I think some of the people that I suggested would be good in roles in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn are like dead now. So it's been a long time. Who did I not? Isaac dwarfs the copy of War and Peace. Absolutely. Tolstoy got nothing on me. Becky's cat is very territorial. Freddy will kick your ass. Well, there you go. So give him that name. He's going to stand up for himself because he's got a tail name and everything. V, hello. Calling, checking in from Dearborn, Michigan. Excellent. Good to see you. Haven't had anybody from Michigan lately. What a pleasure. Anna, waving from Florida. And except for the barking part, Anna says her escape artist cat does not bark like Johnny does. Manda, checking in from Melbourne. Hello. Shannon, good evening from Nueva York. That's really kind of what all the early colonists in America did, isn't it? It's like, well, we could think of a name for this place, but let's just name it after some place in Europe and put the word new in front of it. I mean, even New York, as the song says, was once New Amsterdam. Not super original, guys. Come on. Anyway, so hi, Shannon. Good to see you. Tash, hello. Tash is checking in from Bendigo. Good to see you. Hope your work on your degree is going well. Who else is here that I haven't talked to yet? I think got almost everybody here. Kyra, or Kira. I'm not quite sure which. Melbin, not born. Melbourne. Yeah, but that's how you guys say it. I mean, everybody knows that people in Australia can't talk right. I'm just waiting now for y'all to finish screaming at me. No, of course, you can say whatever you want to. We are just Californians. We don't know anything about anything. That's a known fact. No, that's not true. We know about surfing and skateboarding. Those are the two things that Californians know about. And I don't know anything about either of those. So that makes me not only ignorant, but supremely ignorant. Anyway, it is now almost 7:20, so I better start reading. And again, I have no idea what's going on or going to happen in the story next. Well, I sort of vaguely remember. I mean, I did write it, and I did have to reread it a few years back. But I confess that I kind of skimmed. Because it's bloody long, and I had to start the new book, So I just kind of skimmed and made notes about things that I would want for the new book that I'd want to follow up on. Anyway, so Simon and Binabik are traveling together, and they have they're going along the edges of the forest, and it's inside the forest, kind of, or in the edge of the forest, and Simon is about exhausted by this and having to wade through all the thickets and the undergrowth. Um, so I'm going to start with that, and Simon saying, "But the Weldhelm Road is on the other side of the hills," Simon said. "It would be so much faster to—" Binabik held up a stubby paw, and Simon lapsed into sullen silence. "There is faster, Simon, friend, and then there is being faster," he said, and the cheerful knowingness of his tone almost, but not quite, incited Simon to say something mocking and childish, but temporarily satisfying. When he had carefully shut his already opened mouth, Binabik continued, "Do you see, I thought it might be nice, be a niceness, a nicety, to take some respite tonight in a place where you may be sleeping in a bed and eating at a table. What are you thinking about that, All his resentment boiled away at that like steam from beneath a raised pot lid. A bed? Are we going to an inn? Recalling Shem's story of the puka and the 3 wishes, Simon knew how a person felt seeing his first wish made real, until he abruptly remembered the Erkenguard and the hanged thief. Not an inn? Binabik laughed at Simon's eagerness. But just as good it is. No, it is a better thing. It is a place where you are being fed and rested, and no one is asking who you are or where you come from. He pointed out across the knock, toward where the far side of the forest bowed back around until its perimeter at last ended at the base of the Weldhelm's foothills. Across there it is, although it cannot be seen from where we are standing. Come now. But why can't we walk straight down across the knock? Simon wondered. It's as though Binabik doesn't want to be so out in the open, so exposed. The troll had indeed taken the northeasterly path, skirting the wide meadow to travel in Aldhort's shadow. And what did he mean about a place where no one asks, whatever all that was? Is he hiding too? "Slow down, Binabik," he called. At intervals, Kantaka's white rump bobbed up from the grass, like a seagull floating on the choppy Kinslaw. "Slow down," he called again, hurrying now. The wind caught at his words and gently carried them away up the rippling slope behind him. When Simon had drawn abreast of him at last, the sun on both their backs, Binabik reached up and patted his elbow. "Earlier, I was being very sharp, very abrupt with you. It was not my place, to so speak. Apologies." He squinted up at the youth, then turned his eyes ahead to where Kantaka's tail was waving above the swaying grass, now here, now there, the banner of a tiny but swiftly moving army. "There's nothing," Simon began, but Binabik interrupted. Please, friend Simon," he said, a note of embarrassment clear in his voice. "It was not being my place. Say no more." He lifted both hands up by his ears and waggled them in a strange gesture. "Rather, let me tell you something of where we go. St. Hodoran's of the Knock." "What is that?" "It is the place we will stay. Many times I have been there myself. It is a retreating place, a monastery, as you Adenites say. They are kind to travelers." This was enough for Simon. Immediately visions of long, high halls, roasting meat, and clean palates swarmed through his head, a delirium of comforts. He began to walk faster, accelerating almost to a trot. "Running is not needed," Binabik admonished him. "It will be waiting there still, regardless." He cast a look back at the sun, still several hours above the western horizon. "Do you want me to tell you of St. Hodoran's, or are you knowing already?" "Tell me," Simon replied. "I know about such places. Someone I know stayed at the abbey in Stanshire once." "Well, this is an abbey of specialness. It has a history." Simon raised his eyebrows, willing to listen. A song there is, Binabik said. The Lay of St. Hodrand. It is much more popular in the south than it is in the north. North, by which I am saying Rimmersgard, not Ikanuk, my home. And it is obvious why. Are you knowing anything about the Battle of Oxamrath? That's where the Northerners, the Rimmersmen, beat the Hernister men and the Scythi. Oh, then it was some educating you received after all. Yes, Simon, friend, it was Oxamrath that saw the Scythi and Hernister armies driven from the field by Fingil Red Hand. But there were other, earlier battles, and one of them was here. He spread his hand to encompass the waving field beside them. This land was differently named then. The Scythi, who were, I suppose, those who knew it best, called it Ereb Irigu, Western Gate, that means. Who named it the Knock? It's a funny name. I do not know with certainty. Myself, I am thinking that the Rimmersmen's name for the battle is the root. This place they called Dunokigard, the boneyard. Simon looked back across the rustling grass, watching as row after row bowed and turned beneath the footsteps of the wind. Boneyard? He asked, and a chill of premonition ran through him. The wind is always moving out here, he thought, restless, like it's looking for something lost. Boneyard, yes. There were many underestimations made on both sides for that battle. These grasses are growing above the graves of many thousands of men. Thousands, like the Lich Yard, another city of the dead beneath the feet of the living. Do they know? He suddenly wondered. Do they hear us and hate us for being in the sun? Or are they happier being through with it all? I remember when Shem and Reuben had to put down old Rim, the plow horse. Just before Reuben the bear's mallet had fallen, Rim had looked up at Simon, eyes mild, but knowing, Simon had thought. Knowing and yet not caring. Did King John feel that way at last, old as he was? Simon wondered. Ready to go to sleep like old Rim? And it is a song any harper south of the Frostmarch will sing, Binabik said. Simon shook his head and tried to concentrate, but the sighing of the grass, the drawn whisper of the wind was loud in his ears. I, and you may be thanking me for it, will sing no song, Binabik continued. But about St. Hodrand I should explain, since it is to his house, as it were, we are going. Boy, troll, and wolf reached the easternmost end of the knock and turned again, left sides to the sun. As they waded through the high grass, Binabik pulled off his jacket of hide and knotted the sleeves about his waist. The shirt that he wore beneath was white wool, loose woven and baggy. Hodrand, he began, was a Rimmersman by birth, who after many experiences became converted to the Adenite religion. Eventually he was by the church made a priest. As it is said, no single stitch is interesting until the cloak has fallen apart. We would not have a care what Hodrand did, I am quite sure, had not King Fingil Redhand and his Rimmersmen crossed the Greenwade River, and for the first time moved themselves into the lands of the Scythi. This, as with most tales of importance, is too long for describing in an hour of walking. I will avoid those explainings, and tell this. The Northmen had driven all before them, winning for themselves several battles in their southern movement. The Hernestiri, under their Prince Sinak, decided to meet the Rimmersmen here. Binabik again waved to an all-encompassing hand. Binabik again waved an all-encompassing hand across the breadth of the sun-tipped prairie. to put a stop to their onslaught for all and once. All people and city were fleeing from the knock, fearing to be crushed between two armies. All were fleeing, but Hodderand. Battle, it is seeming, draws priests like it does flies, and Hodderand it drew. He went to Fingil Redhand in his tent, and then was begging that king to withdraw, so by sparing the thousands of lives that would be lost. He preached in his, if I may say, silliness and bravery to Fingil, telling him of the words of Osiris Adon to take your enemy to Brest and make him brother. Fingil, it is not surprising, thought him a madman and was much disgusted to be hearing such words from a fellow Rimmersman. "Oh, is that smoke?" Catching Simon by surprise with a change of subject, Binabik's narrative had lulled him into a sort of sunstruck walking dream. The troll pointed up the far side of the knock. Indeed, from behind a series of gentle hills, the farthest of which looked to bear the marks of cultivation, a thin tendril of smoke was rising. "Supper, I am thinking," Binabik grinned. Simon's mouth fell open in anticipatory longing. This time the troll quickened his steps as well. They turned back toward the sun as the forest's dark edge curved around. "As told," the troll resumed, "Fingil was finding Hodderand's new Agenite ideas most offensive. He commanded the priest be executed, but a merciful soldier instead let him go. But go away Hodderand did not do. When the two armies met at last, he rushed out onto the battlefield, between directly the Hernestiri and Rimmersgarders, brandishing his tree, and calling down onto them all the peace of Osiris God. Caught between two angry pagan armies, he was quickly killed very dead. So," Binabik waved his stick, beating down a high tussock of grass, "a story whose philosophy is difficult, at least for we Quanok, who prefer both being what you call pagan and being what I call alive. The lector in Naban, however, called Hodderand a martyr, and in the early days of Erkenland named this place a church and abbey for the order Hodderandian." "Was it a terrible battle?" Simon asked. "The Rimmersgard men called this place Boneyard. The later battle at Oxamrath was perhaps bloodier, but there was treachery there. Here at the knock it was breast to breast, sword on sword, and blood running like the streams of first thaw." The sun, sliding low in the sky, beat full in their faces. The afternoon breeze, which had sprung up in earnest, bent the long grasses and tossed the hovering insects so that they danced in the air, tiny flashes of golden light. Kantaka came charging back through the field, obliterating in her approach the sawing, hissing music of stem on stem. As they began to trudge up a long incline, she circled them, waggling her wide head in the air and yipping excitedly. Simon shielded his eyes, but could see nothing beyond the rise but the treetops of the forest's edge. He turned to ask Binabik if they were almost there, but the troll was staring down as he walked, brows knit in concentration, paying no heed to Simon or the capering wolf. After some time had passed in silence, sullied only by the swish of their passage through the heavy grass and an occasional agitated bark from Kantaka, Simon's empty stomach steeled him to ask again. He had no sooner opened his mouth when Binabik astonished him by breaking into high, keening song. "I ereb irigu, kai shikizi aruya, shisei burusaya, pikuru nandaitu." As Simon climbed that light-soaked, wind-rippled hill, the words and the strange tune seemed a lament of birds, a desolate call from the high, lonely, unforgiving spaces of the air. A Scythy song. Binabik gave Simon an odd, shy look. I am not singing it well. It is about this place, where the first Scythy died at the hands of man, where blood was first spilled by the warring of men on the lands of the Scythy. As he finished speaking, he flapped a hand at Kantaka, who was bumping his leg with her broad muzzle. Hinikaya, he told her. She is smelling food now. People now, and food cooking, he muttered apologetically. What did the song say? Simon asked. The words, I mean. The strangeness still chilled him, but at the same moment it reminded him how big the world truly was, and how little he had seen even in the busy hayhold. Small, 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 he felt, smaller than the little troll climbing beside him. I doubt, Simon, whether the Scythy words can truly be made for singing in mortal languages, whether their thought is being properly passed on. You see, even worse, it is not the language of my birthplace that we are speaking, you and I. But I can try. They strode on some moments longer. Kantaka had grown bored at last, or had thought better of sharing her lupine enthusiasms with these cloddish humans, and had just disappeared over the top of the rise. This, I am thinking, is near in meaning, Binabik said at last, and then chanted, rather than sang, At the gate of the west, between the sun's eye and the hearts of the ancestors, falls a tear, track of light, track of earthward falling light, touches iron and becomes smoke. Binabik laughed self-consciously. Do you see, in the woodcrafty hands of a troll, the song of air is becoming words of lumpish stone. No, Simon said. I don't understand it exactly, but it makes me feel something. That is then good, Binabik smiled. But no words of mine can be matching the Scythy's own songs, especially this one. It is one of the longest, I am told, and saddest. It is also said that the Earl King, Iunigato, made it himself in the last hours before he was killed by... Ah, look, we are now at the top. Simon raised his eyes. In truth, they had almost reached the summit of the long rise, the endless sea of Aldhart's huddling treetops stretching before them. But I don't think he stopped talking because of that, Simon thought. I think he was about to say something he didn't want to say. How did you learn to sing Scythy songs, Binabik? He asked as they clambered the last few steps to stand on the hill's wide back. We will speak of it, Simon, the troll replied, staring around. But now, look, there is the way down to St. Hadrin's. Starting barely more than a long stone's throw beneath them, clinging to the hill's sloping side like moss growing on an ancient tree, twined rows and rows of evenly spaced, carefully tended vines. They were separated, one from the other, by horizontal terraces cut into the hillside, edges rounded as though the soil had been shaped long ago. Paths ran between the vines, winding down the slope as sinuously as the plants themselves. In the valley below, sheltered on one side by this first small cousin of the Weldhelm Hills, and on the other by the dark border of the forest, a whole basket-weave pattern of farming plots could be seen, laid out with the meticulous symmetry of an illuminated manuscript. Farther along, just visible around the jut of the hill, were the small outbuildings of the abbey, a rough but well-tended collection of wooden sheds and a fenced-in field, empty now of sheep or cows. A gate, the one small moving object in the massive tapestry, swung slowly back and forth. Follow the path, Simon, and it is soon we shall be eating, and perhaps also imbibing a small of the monasterio vintage. Binabik started down at a quick walk. Within moments he and Simon were threading their way among the grapevines, while Kantaka, scornful of the slow traverse of her companions, sprang down the hillside, leaping over the curling vines without touching a stake or crushing a single grape beneath her great paws. Watching his feet as he hurried down the steep path, feeling his heels skid a little on every long stride, Simon suddenly felt rather than saw a presence before him. Thinking that the troll had halted to wait for him, he looked up with a sour expression, about to say something about showing some mercy for folk who did not grow up on a mountain. Instead, when his eyes met the nightmare shape before him, he shouted in fear and lost his footing, tumbling back onto his rump and sliding 2 arms' lengths down the path. Binabik heard him and turned, racing back up the hill to find Simon sitting in the dirt beneath a large tattered scarecrow. The little man looked at the scarecrow, hanging off-center on a wide stake, its crude painted face all but wiped away by wind and rain, then looked down to Simon, sucking his scuffed palms in the middle of the path. Binabik suppressed his laughter until he had helped the boy up, grabbing with his small, strong hands at Simon's elbow and levering him to his feet, but then could hold back no longer. He turned and started back down, leaving Simon frowning angrily as the smothered sounds of the little man's mirth floated up to him. Simon bitterly knocked the worst of the dirt off his breeches and checked the 2 packages tucked in his belt, arrow and manuscript, to make sure neither was damaged. It was obvious Binabik couldn't know about the thief hanged at the crossroads, but he had been there to see the scythes strung up in the woodsman's trap. So why should it be so laughable for Simon to be startled? He felt very foolish, but as he looked again at the scarecrow, he still felt a tremor of foreboding. He reached up to it, grasped the hollow sack of a head, rough and cool to the touch, and folded it over, tucking the top into the shapeless, tattered cloak that flapped at its shoulders, so that the blurry, sightless eyes would be hidden. Let the troll laugh. Binabik, composed now, was waiting farther down. He did not apologize, but patted Simon on the wrist and smiled. Simon returned the smile, but his was smaller than Binabik's. "When I was here 3 moons ago," Binabik said, "on my trip passing southward, I ate the most wonderful venison. The brothers are permitted to take a very few deer from the king's forest for the succoring of wayfarers, and themselves, it needs no saying. Oh, there it is, and smoke is rising." They had rounded the last curve of the hill. The mournful sound of the squeaking gate was directly below them. Just ahead and down the slope were the clustered thatch roofs of the abbey. Smoke was indeed rising, a thin plume floating up to whirl and dissipate in the wind off the hilltop. But it was not coming from chimney or smoke hole. "Binabik?" Simon said, surprise not quite turned to alarm. "Burnt," Binabik whispered. "Or burning. Daughter of the mountains." The gate banged shut and immediately popped open again. "It is a terrible guest who has come to St. Hadrin's house." To Simon, who had never seen the abbey before, the smoking waste below seemed Binabik's very story of the boneyard come to life. As in the terrible mad hours beneath the castle, he felt the jealous claws of the past pushing through to drag present time down into a dark place of regret and fear. The chapel, the main abbey, and most of the outbuildings had been reduced to steaming husks. The charred roof beams, their burdens of wattle and thatch burned away, lay exposed to the ironic spring sky like the blackened ribs of a hungry god's feast. Scattered about the surroundings, as if dice thrown by the self-same god, were the bodies of at least a score of men, as rag-jointed and lifeless as the scarecrow on the hilltop. "Jakku's stones," Binabik breathed, still staring, and tapped himself lightly on the chest with the heel of his hand. He moved forward, pulling his bag from his shoulder and hurried down the hill. Excuse me. He moved forward, pulling his bag from... The dander got me. Sorry, I've just put on the air filter. Where were we? He moved forward, pulling his bag from his shoulder, and hurried down the hill. Kantaka, vindicated, barked and capered joyfully. "Wait," Simon said, barely a whisper. "Wait," he called and lurched after. "Come back! What are you doing? You'll be killed." "Hours old this is," Binabik called without turning. Simon saw him halt briefly to lean over the first body he reached. A moment later, he trotted on. Gasping, heart racing with fear despite the obvious truth of the little man's words, Simon looked at the same body as he passed. It was a man in a black robe, a monk by his appearance. His face was hidden, pressed into the grass. An arrowhead had pushed violently out through the back of his neck. Flies walked daintily on the dried blood. A few steps later, Simon tripped and fell, catching himself painfully with the palms of his hands on the gravel path. When he saw what he had tripped over and saw the flies resettling on the upturned eyes, he was violently, excruciatingly sick. When Binabik found him, Simon had crawled into the shade of a chestnut tree. The youth's head nodded bonelessly as Binabik, like a tender but efficient mother, wiped the bile from his chin with a hank of grass. The carrion stench was everywhere. "Bad, it is. Bad." Binabik touched Simon's shoulder gently as if to reassure himself that the youth was real, then squatted on his haunches, narrowing his eyes against the last red rays of sunshine. "I can find no one that is living here. Monks, for the greatest part, all dressed in abbey robes, but there are others, too." "Others?" It was a gurgle. "Men in travelers' clothes. Frost march men, stopping here for a night, perhaps, although there is a goodish quantity of them. Several are wearing beards, and to me have the looking of rimmersmen. It is a puzzlement." "Where's Kantaka?" Simon asked weakly. He found himself strangely worried for the wolf, although she of all of them was probably least in danger. "Running, smelling. She is very excited." Binabik, Simon noticed, had his stick pulled apart and had tucked the knife section into his belt. "I wonder," the troll said, staring at the rising smoke as Simon finally sat up, "what was bringing this on? Bandits? A kind of battling for religious matters? I hear that is not uncommon with you Adenites, or what? Most curious. Binabik." Simon hawked and spat. His mouth tasted like a pig keeper's boots. "I'm frightened." Somewhere in the distance, Kantaka barked, a surprisingly high-pitched sound. "Frightened?" Binabik's smile was thin as twine. "Frightened is what you should be." Though his face appeared clear and unworried, a kind of stunned defenselessness lurked behind the troll's eyes. That scared Simon more than had anything else. There was something more, a hint of resignation, as if the awful thing had not been entirely unexpected. "I am thinking," Binabik began, when Kantaka's yipping suddenly rose into a snarling crescendo. The troll sprang to his feet. "She has found something," he said, and pulled the startled youth to his feet with a strong tug on the wrist. "Or something finds her." With Simon staggering behind him, impulses of flight and fear twittering through his skull like bats, Binabik dug away in the direction of the sounds. As he ran, he reached his finger into his blowpipe to push something into place. Simon knew a heavy, forbidding realization that this dart was black-tipped. They ran across the abbey grounds, away from the wreckage and through the orchard, following the sounds of Kantaka's distress. A blizzard of apple blossoms fell all around. The wind prodded and pushed along the edge of the forest. Less than 10 running steps into the wood, they saw Kantaka, hackles upraised, her growl so deep that Simon could feel it in his stomach. She had caught a monk and had backed him against a poplar trunk. The man held his pectoral tree on high, as if to call heavenly lightning down on the offending beast. Despite his heroic stance, the sick pallor of his face and his trembling arm showed that he expected no lightning to come. His pop eyes, exaggerated by fear, were fixed on Kantaka. He had not yet seen the 2 newcomers. Adonis fieles extulan in me. His wide lips worked convulsively. The shadows of leaves mottled his pink skull. Kantaka! Binabik shouted. Sosa! Kantaka growled, but her ears twitched. Sosa-ya! The troll whacked his hollow stick against his thigh. The crack echoed. With a last hacking snarl, Kantaka dropped her head and trotted back toward Binabik. The monk, staring at Simon and the troll as though they were quite as terrifying as the wolf, swayed slightly and then toppled backward to land sitting on the ground with the stunned expression of a child who has hurt himself but has not yet realized that he wants to cry. Osiris the merciful, he gabbled at last as the pair hurried toward him. Osiris the merciful, the merciful. A wild look came into his bulging eyes. Leave me alone, you pagan monsters, he shouted and tried to struggle to his feet. Murdering bastards, pagan bastards. His heels skidded from beneath him and he sat down again, mumbling. A troll, a murdering troll. He began to pinken, his color coming back. He sucked in a great convulsive breath, then looked as if at last he truly would cry. Binabik stopped. Grabbing Kantaka by the neck, he gestured Simon forward, saying, Help him. Simon walked slowly, trying with some difficulty to compose his face into something befitting a friend coming to help. His own heart, after all, was drumming at his rib cage like a woodpecker. It's all well now, he said. All well. The monk had covered his face with his sleeve. Killed them all. Now you want us too, he cried, his voice, though muffled, sounding more of self-pity than fear. A Rimmersman he is, said Binabik, as if you would not be guessing already, to hear him at slandering the Canuck. Pah! The troll made a disgusted noise. Help him up, friend Simon, and let us take him out to the light. Simon got the man's bony black-robed elbow and laboriously steered him onto his feet. But when he tried to guide him toward Binabik, the man pulled away. What are you doing? He shouted, feeling on his chest for his tree. Making me desert the others? No, you just get away from me. Others? Simon turned questioningly to Binabik. The troll shrugged and scratched the wolf's ears. Kantaka seemed to grin as if the spectacle amused her. Are there others alive? The boy asked gently. We will help you, and them too, if we can. I'm Simon, and that is my friend Binabik. The monk stared at him suspiciously. I believe you met Kantaka already? Simon added, and immediately felt sorry for the poor joke. Come, who are you? Where are these others? The monk, whose composure was beginning to return, gave him a long, mistrustful look, then turned to stare briefly at troll and wolf. When he turned back to Simon, some of the tension had left his face. If you are indeed a good Adenite acting in charity, then I ask your forgiveness. The monk's tone was stiff, as in one unused to apologizing. I am Brother Hangfisk. Does that wolf, he turned his gaze sideways, does he accompany you? She does, Binabik said sternly before Simon could answer. Too bad it is that she frightened you, Rimmersman, but you must notice that she did you no harm." Hengfisk did not reply to Binabik. "I have left my 2 charges for too long a time," he told Simon. "I must go to them now." "We'll come with you," Simon replied. "Perhaps Binabik can help. He is very gifted with herbs and things." The Rimmersman briefly raised his eyebrows, which made his eyes seem to bulge all the more. His smile was bitter. "It is a kind thought, boy, but I am afraid Brother Langren and Brother Dokais are not going to be helped by any woodland poultices." He turned on his heel and struck off, rather unsteadily, into the deeper forest. "But wait!" called Simon. "What happened to the abbey?" "I do not know," Hengfisk said without turning. "I was not here." Simon looked to Binabik for help, but the troll made no immediate move to follow. Instead, he called after the limping monk, "Oh, Brother Hengfish!" The monk whirled, furious. "My name is Hengfisk, troll." Simon noted how quickly color came to his face. "I was merely making translation for my friend." Binabik grinned his yellow grin. "Who is not speaking the language of Rimmersgard. You say you are not knowing what happened. Where were you when your brethren were being so very slaughtered?" The monk seemed about to spit back a reply, but instead reached his hand up to his tree and clutched it. A moment later, in a quieter voice, he said, Come then and see. I have no secrets from you, troll, or from my god." He stalked away. "Why were you making him mad, Binabik?" Simon whispered. "Haven't enough bad things happened here already?" Binabik's eyes were slits, but he had not lost his grin. "Perhaps I am being unkind, Simon, but you heard his speaking. You have been seeing his eyes. Do not let yourself be fooled by the wearing of a holy robe. We cannot have wakened too many times in the night, finding eyes like this Hengfisk's looking down on us, and torches and axes close by. Your Usiris Adon has not burned with success that hatred from his northern heart." With a cluck for Kantaka to follow, the troll moved after the stiff-backed priest. "But listen to you," Simon said, holding Binabik's eye. "You're full of hatred, too." "Ah," the troll lifted a finger before his now expressionless face. "But I am not claiming to believe in your, forgive the saying, upside-down God of mercy." Simon took a breath to say something, then thought better of it. Okay, I'm going to go a few minutes past the top of the hour because we only got about a page and a half left. Brother Hengfisk turned once, silently taking notice of their presence. He did not speak again for some time. The light that filtered through the leaves was fast diminishing. Within a short time, his angular, black-robed form was little more than a moving shadow before them. Simon was startled when he turned and said, "Here." He led them around the base of a great fallen tree, whose exposed roots resembled more than anything else a huge broom, a broom that would have fired the imagination of Rachel the dragon toward heroic, legendary feats of sweeping. Simon's wry thought of Rachel, coupled with the day's events, brought on a pang of homesickness so intense that he stumbled, catching himself with a hand against the scaly bark of the fallen tree. Hengfisk was kneeling, throwing branches into a small fire that glowed in a shallow pit. Lying beside the fire, one on either side, in the shelter of the tree's toppled length, were 2 men. "This is Langren," Brother Hengfisk said, indicating the one on the right, whose face was largely obscured by a bloody bandage made of sacking. "I found him, the only one alive at the abbey when I returned. I think Adon will take him back soon." Even in the fading light, Simon could see that Brother Langren's skin, that which showed, was pale and waxy. Hengfisk threw another stick on the fire as Binabik, without meeting the Rimmersman's eyes once, kneeled down beside the injured man and began to gently examine him. That one is Dokais, Hengfisk said, gesturing to the other man, who lay as limply as Langrian, but without visible injury. It was him I went out to find when he did not come back from his vigil. When I brought Dokais back, carried him, there was bitter pride in Hengfisk's tone, I returned to find all dead. He made the sign of the tree on his breast. All but Langrian. Simon moved close to Brother Dokais, a thin young man with a long nose and the blue chin stubble of the Hernisteri. What happened to him? What's wrong? I do not know, boy, Hengfisk said. He is mad. He has caught up some fever of the brain. He returned to his search for firewood. Simon watched Dokais for a moment, noting the man's labored breathing and the slight trembling of his thin eyelids. As he turned to look over to Binabik, who was delicately unwinding the bandage around Langrian's head, a white hand came up like a snake from the black robe before him and caught his shirt front in a horrifically powerful grip. Dokais, eyes still shut, had stiffened his back. His back so bowed. Let me start that again. Dokais, eyes still shut, had stiffened, his back so bowed that his waist rose from the ground. His head was thrown back and snapped from side to side. Binabik! Simon shouted in terror. He's... Ah! The voice that pushed up from Dokai's straining throat was harsh with pain. The black wagon! See, it's coming for me! He thrashed again like a landed fish, and his words brought Simon a thrill of reawakening horror. The hilltop. I remember something. And the creak of black wheels. Oh, Morgenes, what am I doing here? A moment later, while Binabik and Hengfisk stared in amazement from the far side of the fire pit, Dokais had pulled Simon forward until the youth's face was almost touching the Hernistir man's own fear-stretched features. They're taking me back, the monk hissed. Back to that terrible place. Shockingly, his eyes popped open and stared blindly into Simon's own, a hand's breadth away. Simon could not struggle out of the monk's grip, even though Binabik was now at his side, trying to help pull him free. You know, Dokais cried. You know who it is. You've been marked. Marked like I was. I saw them as they passed, the white foxes. They walked in my dream. The white foxes. Their master has sent them to put ice on our hearts and take away our souls on their black wagon. And then Simon was loose, gasping and sobbing. Binabik and Hengfisk held the twitching monk until he finally stopped thrashing. The silence of the black forest returned, surrounding the tiny campfire as the gulfs of night embrace a dying star. And that's where we're stopping, at the end of the chapter. Next up, chapter 20. So we will return, or I will return. Some of you will return. As many of you as want to return will return, and you will be welcomed. Next Sunday, first at 1 a.m. California time, and then again this slot, 7 p.m. California time. I thank you so much for your company, and I urge you to take good care of yourself and your loved ones. Take good care of everybody, in fact, at least to the extent that you can, and still take good care of yourself and your loved ones. So with that, I say peace. Good to see you all, and I will see you again very soon. Good night.